A white couple near the front of the store was being assisted by a different employee, one who was smiling, engaged, and offering personalized recommendations. An older woman had been approached almost immediately by a cheerful staff member eager to help. But him? He had been ignored, dismissed, treated as if he didn't matter. Terrence turned back to the young employee, determined to give him one last chance. "You seem busy," he said, keeping his tone neutral. "Is there someone else who might be able to help?" The employee smirked, the corners of his mouth curling slightly. "I don't think anyone's free right now. Just figure out, all right." The words landed like a slap. Terrence didn't get angry, not yet, but the disappointment hit him like a wave. This wasn't just about bad service. This felt like a judgment, a decision. The employee had decided, just by looking at him, that Terrence wasn't worth his time. And as Terrence watched him walk away, phone in hand, without even a second glance, he knew this was a problem far bigger than one bad employee. This was about the culture inside his own company, and he wasn't sure he was ready for what he was about to uncover next. Terrence took a slow breath, steadying himself. He wasn't going to let one bad experience define the entire store. Maybe this was just one careless employee. Maybe the rest of the staff upheld the values he had built his company on. But deep down, something felt off. So, instead of walking out, he decided to stay and observe. As he moved through the store, his eyes followed the interactions happening around him. Near the home goods section, an elderly man stood hesitantly in front of a rack of neatly folded towels. Within seconds, a young Latina employee approached him, her smile warm and inviting. "Hi there. Need any help finding something today?" Her voice was friendly, patient. The older man nodded, explaining that he was looking for a gift for his wife. The employee listened attentively, offering thoughtful suggestions, even taking the time to walk him through color choices. Terrence couldn't help but admire her professionalism. This was the kind of service his company was supposed to be known for. But then, he turned his attention elsewhere. At the front of the store, a well-dressed white couple browsed through a selection of high-end kitchen appliances. A different employee, this one young, energetic, was eagerly assisting them. "Oh, this one's fantastic," the employee said enthusiastically, picking up a box. "It's one of our best models. And if you're interested, I could check if we have any special discounts for you today." The couple smiled, nodding along as the employee continued his helpful, engaged conversation. Terrence watched, a strange feeling settling in his chest. Two interactions, two employees, the same store. Yet, the contrast between how these customers were being treated and how he had just been treated, it wasn't a coincidence. The moment that broke him. As he turned down one of the aisles, Terrence overheard a quiet conversation happening near the home goods section. Two employees, both young men, were leaning against a shelf, talking in hushed voices. He didn't mean to eavesdrop, but then he heard something that made his entire body go still. "That guy over there," one of them said, jerking his head in Terrence's direction. "Probably just here to browse. People like him never buy anything big." Terrence felt a slow, sinking feeling in his stomach. "Yeah," the second employee chuckled. "Look at him. He doesn't exactly scream VIP customer." The two of them laughed lightly, their words so casual, so effortless, like this kind of assumption was just normal, like it was a fact. Terrence clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay calm. It wasn't just bad customer service. It wasn't just one employee being lazy. It was an attitude, a mindset, a culture. A toxic undercurrent had taken root in his store, the very store he had built on values of fairness, respect, and inclusivity. And worst of all, he had no idea how long it had been happening. As the employees continued talking, completely unaware of who they were speaking about, Terrence knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just a problem. It was a wake-up call, and he wasn't about to ignore it. Terrence took one last glance at the employees, still chatting in hushed voices, completely unaware of the weight their words carried. He had heard enough. Without another word, he turned and made his way toward the front of the store. As he neared the checkout area, something caught his attention. Behind one of the registers, a middle-aged black woman was ringing up customers with a warm smile. Her name tag read Denise. "Did you find everything okay today?" she asked the customer in front of her, her voice kind and professional. Terrence stopped, watching. Unlike the indifferent employee at the electronics section, Denise actually cared. She greeted each person with a genuine smile, making small talk as she scanned items. When an elderly woman struggled with her payment, Denise was patient, reassuring her that there was no rush. This was what his stores were supposed to be. This was the kind of employee he had envisioned when he first started this company. So why were there so few like her left? Terrence stepped back, letting out a slow breath as he made his way toward the exit. The automatic doors slid open, and the warmth of the Texas sun hit him as he walked back to his car. As soon as he got inside, he gripped the steering wheel, staring out at the store that bore his company's name, his vision, his dream. But today, it felt like a stranger to him. Where did it all go wrong? His mind raced back to the early days, the late nights spent training employees, the long hours ensuring that every store reflected the values he believed in. Back then, he personally taught new managers the importance of customer service. Back then, every customer mattered. But now, he had seen firsthand that those values had started to fade. He had been ignored, judged, dismissed, and he knew, without a doubt, that if he hadn't been the CEO, if he had just been another customer walking in off the street, nothing would have changed. And that was the most painful realization of all. Because this wasn't just about one bad employee. This was a systemic issue. It was a culture that had been allowed to fester, unchecked. He had been so focused on growing the company, expanding into new cities, opening more stores, that he had lost sight of the foundation. And if the foundation was crumbling, the whole empire would eventually collapse. Terrence closed his eyes for a moment, exhaling slowly. He had a choice. He could drive away, let the managers handle it, hope things changed. Or he could go back inside and fix it himself. His grip on the steering wheel tightened. He knew what he had to do. Terrence opened his eyes, took a deep breath, and then he stepped out of the car. And this time, when he walked back into the store, he wasn't just another customer. He was the CEO. Terrence stepped back into the store, but this time, his posture was different. Gone was the casual, anonymous shopper. Now, he walked with purpose, with authority, with a mission. No one in the store knew it yet, but everything was about to change. He made his way to the customer service desk. A young employee behind the counter glanced up. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked politely. "Yes," Terrence said, his voice steady. "I need to speak with the store manager." Right now, there was a brief hesitation, but then the employee nodded. "Of course, sir." One moment. Minutes later, a man in his late 40s emerged from the back office. His name tag read Brian, store manager. Brian approached with a professional yet slightly wary expression. "Good afternoon, sir. I'm Brian, the manager. What can I do for you?" Terrence looked him directly in the eye. "Brian," he said evenly, "we need to talk." Brian furrowed his brows, but before he could say anything, Terrence extended his hand. "My name is Terrence Hall," he said firmly. The moment the words left his mouth, Brian's expression changed. His eyes widened in shock, and a flicker of panic crossed his face. "And Mr. Hall? As in the CEO?" Terrence gave a single nod. Brian visibly swallowed, his posture shifting from confident to uncertain. I didn't know you were visiting today." "If I had known," Terrence held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "That's exactly the point, Brian. You weren't supposed to know." Brian blinked, clearly unsettled. "Sir, if there's an issue, There is an issue," Terrence interrupted. His voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable weight behind it. "And we need to address it now." Brian nodded quickly, straightening his stance. "Of course, Mr. Hall. Please, let's step into my office." "No," Terrence cut in. "Right here is fine." Employees had started to glance over, sensing that something was happening. Some of them exchanged curious whispers. Others stiffened, suddenly more aware of their actions. "I came into this store today as a regular customer," Terrence began, his voice clear and controlled. "I wanted to see, firsthand, how my customers are treated. And do you know what I found?" Brian hesitated. I'm not sure, sir. Let me tell you," Terrence continued. "I was ignored by an employee in electronics. I was dismissed, given no real assistance, and treated like I wasn't worth their time. Brian's face paled. I overheard two employees making assumptions about me, about whether I could afford anything in this store. They judged me without knowing a single thing about who I am. Brian's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. And while that was happening, Terrence went on, I watched other customers receive excellent service. Customers who just so happened to not look like me. Brian exhaled, running a hand over his face. Mr. Hall, I didn't know this was happening. Terrence narrowed his eyes. And that, he said slowly, is exactly the problem. Brian looked down for a moment, clearly struggling for words. I always tell my employees to treat customers with respect, he finally said. I had no idea there was this kind of behavior happening under my watch. Then tell me, Brian, Terrence pressed, if I saw it in just one visit, how many customers do you think have experienced the same thing? Silence. Brian looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Finally, he spoke. I don't have an excuse for that, sir. Terrence took a step closer, lowering his voice just slightly. This store represents my company, my vision, and right now it's failing. Brian swallowed hard. Understand, sir. I promise I'll... No, Brian. Terrence's voice was firm. This doesn't get fixed with just a promise. This gets fixed with action, and it starts today. Brian straightened his back, nodding quickly. Yes, Mr. Hall. Absolutely. Terrence took a deep breath, glancing around at the employees who had been watching from a distance. Gather the staff, he said. We're having a meeting. Right now. Brian hesitated for only a second before nodding again. Right away, sir. And just like that, the employees of the store were about to receive a wake-up call they would never forget. The air inside the break room was thick with tension. Employees sat in uneasy silence, their eyes flickering toward each other, trying to gauge what was happening. Some looked nervous, others are confused, and a few looked indifferent, as if they weren't sure why they were even there. But then the door opened, and Terrence Hall stepped inside. The room fell silent. Some of them recognized him immediately. Whispers passed between a few employees. Others looked puzzled, their brows furrowed in confusion. And then he spoke. Good afternoon, everyone, Terrence said, his voice steady, controlled. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Terrence Hall. I am the founder and CEO of this company. Murmurs rippled through the room. Eyes widened. Employees straightened in their seats, suddenly more alert. Terrence scanned the room, his gaze sharp, unwavering. I came into this store today, not as your CEO, not as an executive, but as a regular customer. He let the words sink in for a moment. I wanted to see firsthand what kind of experience our customers receive every day. And what I found was deeply disappointing. The room remained silent, but Terrence could see the shifting expressions, some nervous, some guilty, some genuinely curious about what he was about to say. He took a step forward, placing his hands on the table. I watched as some of you went above and beyond for your customers. I saw kindness, professionalism, the kind of service that this company was built on. His gaze flickered toward Denise, who sat near the front, looking both surprised and a little proud. Denise, he said, nodding toward her, your dedication didn't go unnoticed. You treated every customer with care, with respect. And that is exactly what I expect from every single person who wears this company's uniform. Denise blinked, then gave a small, appreciative nod. But then, Terrence's voice hardened. Unfortunately, I also saw the opposite. The tension in the room grew heavier. Some employees shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others kept their eyes fixed on the floor. Terrence's voice didn't rise, but the weight of his words was undeniable. I was ignored. I was dismissed. I was treated like I wasn't worth the time or effort of certain employees in this room. His gaze landed on the young man from the electronics section. The employee who had sighed, rolled his eyes, and barely acknowledged him. The employee stiffened. His face was drained of color. You looked right at me, Terrence said, his voice like steel, and you decided I wasn't worth helping. You brushed me off, told me to figure it out myself. Is that how you think customers should be treated? The young man swallowed hard, shifting uncomfortably. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. Terrence didn't need an answer. He He turned to the rest of the room. And it didn't stop there, he continued. I overheard employees talking about me, making assumptions about what kind of customer I was, whether or not I could even afford to buy something here. And the worst part, he let his gaze sweep over every person in the room. I know I'm not the first customer who has experienced this. A few employees looked down, guilt flashing across their faces. This is not about one bad employee, Terrence said, his voice firm. This is about a culture that has gone unchecked. And that changes today. Terrence straightened, his tone unwavering. This company was built on a simple principle. Every customer matters. It doesn't matter who they are, what they look like, how they're dressed, whether they're spending $5 or $500. They matter. He took a slow breath, then spoke the words that had been sitting in his chest all day. If we do not respect our customers, we fail. Silence. And I will not let this company fail. His voice carried through the room, sinking into every person sitting in front of him. Some employees nodded subtly. Others sat frozen, absorbing the weight of what had just been said. And Terrence knew this was only the beginning. A heavy silence filled the break room. The employees sat still, processing everything they had just heard. Some looked guilty, others looked uncertain. A few seemed genuinely moved. And then Terrence spoke again. But this time, his voice wasn't just filled with frustration. It was filled with determination. Now, he said, it's time to fix this. He straightened, looking each employee in the eye. This is not about punishing individuals. This is about accountability, about making sure that what happened today never happens again. He turned to Brian, the store manager. Starting immediately, we will be retraining every employee on customer service. And I don't mean just a quick refresher. I mean real, mandatory training on how to treat every customer with respect, regardless of their background, their appearance, or how much they're spending. Brian nodded quickly, jotting down notes. But that's not all, Terrence continued. From now on, there will be surprise visits to every store. Not just this one, every single store. A murmur passed through the employees. Some looked nervous. Others sat up a little straighter. I will not announce these visits. Neither will our senior management. When I walk into a store, I want to see it as it is, not as employees pretend it to be when they know I'm coming. The message was clear. This wasn't about creating a temporary fix. This was about real change. Terrence took a step forward. I also know that some of you, maybe a lot of you, have things you want to say but don't feel comfortable speaking up. He scanned the room, watching as a few employees shifted in their seats. That's why we're setting up an anonymous feedback system, a place where you can report issues, whether it's about customers, co-workers, or even management, without fear of retaliation. He paused, letting that sink in, because if I had to come in undercover to find out what's really happening here, that means I haven't been listening well enough. And that changes today. Terrence exhaled, then looked around the room. I built this company because I wanted to create something different, a place where people, all people, felt valued when they walked through those doors. His voice softened slightly, but the passion in it remained. Somewhere along the way, we lost that, but I refused to let it stay that way. He straightened, delivering his final words with unwavering conviction. We're going to fix this, not just in this store, but in every store across this company. Because this isn't just about business. This is about who we are. And I promise you, we will get it back. The room remained silent for a beat. And then, slowly, Denise nodded. Then another employee. And another. One by one, they started to realize this wasn't just a speech. This was the beginning of something real. The room remained still. The weight of Terrence's words hung in the air, pressing down on every employee. Some looked reflective, others inspired, and a few even seemed a little ashamed. But one thing was certain, they had all been changed. The silence was finally broken when Terrence turned to Denise. She had sat quietly throughout the meeting, but her presence had spoken louder than words. She had been a bright spot in an otherwise dark day. Terrence walked over and extended his hand. "Denise," he said, his voice sincere, "thank you." She blinked, surprised. "For what, sir?" she asked hesitantly. He smiled, shaking his head. "For reminding me that this company still has hope." Her eyes softened, and for the first time all day, Terrence felt something shift inside him. This place could still be saved. As he walked out of the break room and through the store one final time, he felt the gazes of employees following him. Some of them were still processing what had just happened. Others seemed eager, ready to prove that they could do better. And as he stepped through the automatic doors and back into the afternoon sun, one thing was clear. Change wouldn't happen overnight. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be instant. But it would happen, because he would make sure of it. As Terrence sat in his car, staring back at the store that had once been his pride and joy, he thought about everything he had learned that day. The bias, the indifference, the toxic culture that had been allowed to fester. But he also thought about the people who still believed in what this company stood for. People like Denise. People who treated others with kindness, no matter who they were. And he realized something. Change doesn't start with a company, or a policy, or a rule. Change starts with people. People who refuse to stay silent when something is wrong. People who choose to treat others with respect, no matter what. He turned the key in the ignition, but before he drove away, one final thought lingered in his mind. What about you? Have you ever been in a situation like this? Have you ever seen someone treated unfairly? What did you do? What would you do? Because in the end, the biggest changes always start with one person brave enough to take action. So, will that person be you? This ending ties everything together, bringing resolution, inspiration, and a call to action for the audience. It's thought-provoking, emotionally impactful, and leaves the listener with something to reflect on. Like this video to help spread awareness. Share it with your friends and family, because conversations spark change. Comment below and tell us your thoughts. Have you ever witnessed an abuse of power? Let's talk about it. Follow our channel for more powerful real-life stories. And turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Change starts with awareness. Awareness starts with you. Be part of the movement. What happens when a successful CEO disguises himself and steps into his own store, only to discover a shocking truth? It was a bright Saturday morning, just past 10 a.m. Terrence Hall sat in his car, adjusting the brim of his baseball cap in the rearview mirror. The man staring back at him was barely recognizable. Gone was the powerful CEO who had built a multi-million-dollar retail empire. In his place was just another ordinary man, dressed in a simple hoodie and jeans, blending into the crowd. Today wasn't about boardrooms, spreadsheets, or profit margins. Today was about something far more important. It was about truth. For years, Terrence had built his business on a simple yet powerful principle. Every customer matters, no matter who they are. His stores were meant to be welcoming, a place where everyone received the same level of respect and service. But lately, troubling whispers had reached his ears. Rumors of poor customer service, complaints about bias, stories of customers being ignored or treated unfairly. Terrence couldn't ignore it. He needed to know if these claims were true, but not as the CEO, because if he walked in wearing a tailored suit, employees would be on their best behavior. He needed to see his business through the eyes of a regular customer. So, he chose a store just outside of Dallas, Texas. It wasn't the company's flagship location, nor was it the most profitable one. But to him, it was special. This was the first store he had ever opened outside of his home state. Years ago, he had poured his heart into it, visiting constantly, making sure it flourished. But now, as he sat in the parking lot, staring at the store's familiar logo, a question lingered in his mind. Had the values he built this company on stood the test of time, or had they faded away? Taking a deep breath, he stepped out of the car, pulling the strap of his worn-out canvas bag over his shoulder. He walked towards the store, the automatic doors sliding open in front of him. The cool rush of air conditioning greeted him, along with the soft hum of the store, shoppers pushing carts, children laughing, employees moving around. At first glance, everything seemed to be running smoothly. But Terrence wasn't here to look at the surface. He was here to dig deeper. And what he was about to discover would change everything. The automatic doors slid open, and Terrence stepped inside. A wave of cool air hit him, a stark contrast to the warmth of the Texas sun outside. The familiar scent of new merchandise filled the air, freshly unpacked boxes, the faint hint of plastic, and a lingering trace of cleaning solution. For a brief moment, a sense of pride swelled in his chest. This was his store. The logo above the entrance, the polished floors, the neatly arranged shelves. It was all part of the empire he had built from the ground up. He had dreamed of this, worked tirelessly for this, and now he was standing in it, not as a CEO, but as an anonymous customer. But he wasn't here to admire his success. He was here to uncover the truth. Terrence shifted his focus, scanning the store with the keen eye of an observer. Everything appeared to be running smoothly. Shoppers navigated the aisles, pushing carts filled with products. Children's voices rose and fell in excitement as they ran toward the toy section. Employees in uniform moved efficiently, stocking shelves, ringing up customers, assisting with inquiries. From the outside, everything looked perfect, but Terrence knew better than to take things at face value. He had learned long ago that appearances could be deceiving. It was time to test the waters. His gaze settled on the electronics section at the far end of the store. A young male employee leaned lazily against the counter, his attention fully absorbed by the screen of his phone. He scrolled absent-mindedly, his fingers moving with the ease of someone lost in his own world. Terrence watched for a moment, waiting to see if the employee would look up, acknowledge the customers passing by, perhaps offer assistance. But nothing. The young man remained glued to his phone, oblivious to everything around him. Terrence took a slow breath and made his way toward the counter. He didn't walk with the confidence of a businessman inspecting his own store. No, he moved like an ordinary customer, browsing leisurely, blending in. He reached for a pair of headphones displayed on the shelf. Lifting them, he turned the box over in his hands, studying the details on the back. Would the employee notice? Would he step up and offer help? Terrence waited. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. Still nothing. The young man hadn't even glanced up. Terrence's grip on the box tightened slightly. His stomach twisted, not with anger, but with disappointment. This wasn't just inattentiveness. This was indifference. Maybe it was a one-time thing, he reasoned. Maybe the employee was having a bad day. Maybe he hadn't noticed. But deep down, Terrence knew this was only the beginning, and what he was about to experience next would be far worse. Terrence stood in front of the electronics counter, the box of headphones still in his hands. The employee remained fixated on his phone, scrolling, tapping, completely uninterested in the world around him. He still hadn't acknowledged Terrence's presence. The CEO-turned-customer cleared his throat, hoping to get the young man's attention. Nothing. He shifted his stance slightly, setting the box down on the counter with just enough force to make a soft thud. The employee finally looked up. His expression was blank, almost bored, like Terrence was interrupting something far more important. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone flat, devoid of warmth or enthusiasm. Terrence forced a polite smile. "Yeah, I was wondering if you could tell me a bit more about these," he said, tapping the box. "Are they good for outdoor use?" The employee barely glanced at the product before shrugging. "I don't know. Probably." Then, just as quickly, his eyes dropped back to his phone. Terrence blinked, taken aback. He had expected, at the very least, a simple effort. Maybe a quick check of the product details, or even a half-hearted suggestion. Instead, he got this. Trying to keep his patience, he continued. "Could you maybe check? I just want to be sure before I buy them." The young man sighed, a long, exaggerated sigh, as if Terrence had just asked him to lift a 100-pound box instead of read a few words. Reluctantly, he picked up the box, turned it over, and skimmed the back. "It says here, they're weatherproof," he mumbled, tossing the box back onto the counter with little care. No further explanation. No attempt to offer more details. Nothing. Terrence could feel his frustration rising, but he kept his voice calm. "Okay, and do you know if they're compatible with most devices?" This time, the employee rolled his eyes. "Look, man, all the details are right here on the box," he said, motioning vaguely at the packaging. "You can read it yourself." Terrence stared at him, momentarily at a loss for words. It wasn't just laziness. It was dismissiveness. And then came the final blow. The employee, without another word, turned away, grabbed his phone again, and started scrolling as if Terrence no longer existed. Terrence gripped the box tightly, a knot forming in his stomach. This wasn't just a bad customer service moment. It was something deeper, something uglier, because as he glanced around the store, he noticed something troubling. Other customers, specifically white customers, were receiving an entirely different experience.